Good afternoon, everyone, and on behalf of ECIA and all its members, National Institute, welcome to this first webinar about Risk in Focus 2024, focused on macroeconomic and geopolitical uncertainty. I'm very happy to welcome today a lot of people, currently around 200 from all over the globe. So welcome, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. So in terms of logistic for the day, I would like to share with you this Slido QR code that you are invited to use. So please take a picture and use it for the Q&A at the end of the session, but also for the polls that we will have through the session. And finally, for your CPE certificate, so you will have the opportunity to give your details in Slido before the end of the webinar. So this topic, I think we will all agree, is very important and getting more and more important year after year. And we had a good example, as you know, in Brussels recently with, unfortunately, 2 Swedish people that died in a taxi. And I think that's an important evolution in the world, and that's an evolution where internal audit should play a role to help the organization. So I'm very happy to introduce to you our facilitator for this webinar, Paolo Nasi. Paolo is Executive Director, Head of Corporate and Finance Audit at Intesa Sanpaolo. He's a specialist in this matter and has been working with ECIA and especially the Banking Committee on various position paper and presentation. And I'm sure he will share with you a lot of good and best practices together with his panelists. So Paolo, let me give the floor to you now.
Thank you, Pascal. Thank you very much. And good afternoon to our qualified audience. Today, we are going to look at the result of Risk in Focus about macroeconomic and geopolitical uncertainty. And then we will try to figure out how internal audit can help our organizations to cope with this growing concern, aided by 2 distinguished guests that just a little bit later will ask to introduce themselves. Risk in Focus report for 2024 draws on a survey of almost 800 chief audit executives from 17 European countries, 5 roundtable events, and 11 one-to-one interviews. CAE confirmed macroeconomic and geopolitical uncertainty as one of the top risks, the 3rd biggest, together with changes in law and regulation. This is the highest position since the survey began in 2018, and 33% of the respondents ranked macroeconomic and geopolitical risk as the first. This is true for European organization, not so much for other countries. If we go to slide 5, we look at the results of the global survey, and we see here that, for example, North America ranked it in the 8th position, and Middle East and Africa regions even lower. As we witness a growing polarization and other crises break out, I'm not sure that we would have had the same results if we did the survey now. Anyway, some macro trends are also emerging: search for security, diversification of supply chains, friendly reshoring. Doing business in certain areas requires specific knowledge and capabilities to bear the risks, but also to exploit opportunities. However, the importance of these risks is here to stay also for the survey. If you see slide 7, we can see that also in next 3 years, we have this risk among the most important. And we have also a very strong evidence that Chief Audit Officer think that currently internal audit spends very little time on them, and that internal audit should dramatically increase its efforts on the area in the next few years. We can see this depicted in slide 8 and 9. We are now going to discuss with our panelists this apparent anomaly just later. While we can spot the general picture and we can also imagine some possible future crisis scenarios, the effect of these events may be different for each company, depending on the specificities of its operating and business model, on its exposure to such crisis scenarios. This is the reason why organizations must act in order to understand their exposure to this multiple source of risk and trying to manage it. When Russia invaded Ukraine last year, many in the West were taken by surprise, both by the fact itself, although there were certainly signs of what was about to happen, and by the profound consequences that this event had on the international political and economic balances. In the organization where I work, we had 2 subsidiaries located on opposite sides of the conflict, and we found ourselves managing the emergency, activating the crisis management system, having to intervene on an array of problems that normally move independently and are classified into different categories of risk. First of all, we minded about people safety was the first concern at the time. Also, we had to do with business continuity, cyber attacks, reputational risk, and then obviously the impact on business, credit risk, market risk, and related economics. One thing we have learned is that geopolitical risks have multiple impacts on different types of risk. They must therefore be tackled with a cross-cutting approach. Okay, I now would like to invite kindly Arlene McGeechan and Alessandro Nespoli, that are the 2 distinguished panelists that will help us in the next few hours. Please.
Hello there, shall I start? Ciao Paolo. My name is Arlene McGeechan. I am the Group Chief Audit Officer for Royal London Group, and I am delighted to make friends with auditors all around the globe. So it's very, very pleased to meet you virtually. I am a career internal auditor and risk manager, so nothing makes me more happy than to talk to you all about my passion, which is internal auditing, and how our organisation and the network that I have in the UK is tackling geopolitical risk. I'm also a council member on the Chartered Institute of Internal Auditors UK and Ireland's Council, so have some connections within the Institute of Internal Auditors as well. Alessandro, over to you.
Thank you. Ciao everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Since I guess most of our people are joining us from all over the world. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. I'm Alessandro Nespoli. I'm Chief Audit and Compliance Officer of Prysmian. Prysmian is a leading company in the cable industry for energy and telecommunication. We are listed here in Milan at the Milan Stock Exchange. 30,000 employees, more than 100 manufacturing facilities all over the world. I'm also a member of the Italian chapter of the Association of Internal Auditors here in Milan. So thank you again for inviting, and I can't wait to talking with you about my experience and the numbers of still open questions that I have that I would like to share also with you, trying to find out possibly opportunities to answer to many of the questions and the risks that are embedded into the subject matter that will be discussed with you all today. Thank you, Paolo.
Thank you very much, Alessandro. I think that we can go with the first poll. We would like also to receive your feedback as we go. And so I invite Pascal to launch this poll about what are the geopolitical threats that you are most concerned about today for your organization. We think can do it with Slido. Let's see what is appearing. It is very interesting words that are coming up. Yeah, I think one comment that we made is about, okay, the war is the most, the threats that we all fear, but there is another risk that is quite important, and that is linked with the geopolitical and our uncertainty. That is the cybersecurity risk. And I remember that this is the risk that is number one in the risk in focus survey. Okay. I think that we are probably okay. We have a clear feedback from the audience. Now I would like to ask to Arlene our first questions to go on. Do you think that organizations are aware enough of their exposure to macroeconomic and geopolitical risks? And can you share the role you play in your organization about this subject? This is first Arlene, and then we will turn to Alessandro. Please, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I think organizations are aware of the headline of macroeconomic and geopolitical risk, but certainly my experience is that they're still grappling with the way in which to think about this risk, because as you said, Paolo, it cuts across so many parts of an organization, and we saw that from the results of the poll, that there was not one single answer. There was a multitude of different ways of thinking about macro and geopolitical risk. So I think organizations are still grappling with how to think about this risk, and therefore what has to change in terms of the way that they think about their strategy and the way in which they manage risk to deal with this. And by that I mean we need a multidisciplinary approach with lots of different subject matter experts approaching this as one group, rather than thinking about it in individual silos or business units or different lines of defence. So having the right people around the table with diverse thoughts to be able to challenge this from a number of different ways is crucial. And I'm still seeing organisations warming up to that rather than being good at it. And also just thinking about the multitude of different impacts it can have on different layers of the organisation and its strategy. Stitching all of those different parts together is still very much a work in progress. So the role that internal auditors can play in your respective organisations, first and foremost, I can't emphasise enough, internal auditors need to know their organisations and they need to know their strategy to be able to add value. They need to be talking like events like this, sharing with fellow internal auditors across the world, what are you seeing and hearing in your area? How might that be impacting the way that you approach your audits? And share that best practice and steal with pride other people's good ideas. Because as a sector and as a group of friends, we should be helping each other more. Leveraging things like the risk and focus, there's lots of wonderfully rich insight on the different internal audit chapters across the globe. Global IA, the European CIIA, the UK CIA, leverage all of the different thought leadership that's out there and encourage that multidisciplinary workshopping. So get your second line risk colleagues, your first line business leaders around a table and start talking about what needs to go right for us to be prepared to manage macroeconomic and geopolitical risk, but also workshop what could go wrong and start to think forward around what might come next. Let's think about this as if we're building our own disaster movie, and let's try and create a happy ending from that. And also start to challenge those traditional risk management tools like the risk register. Risk doesn't work in horizontal neat lines any longer. So why do we still try and capture risk in nice little neat boxes on an Excel spreadsheet? We need to start to disrupt that thinking. So there's some thoughts to start off the conversation, Paolo.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Arlene. I would ask to Alessandro the same questions from his perspective, from his experience.
Grazie, Paolo. Very interesting questions in the sense that, of course, we are aware. We are aware about what is happening. We see what is happening, but generally, we have a reactive approach. We are not used, at least in my organization, when talking about macroeconomic and geopolitical uncertainty. We have not implemented yet methodology that may help us in a predictive, in a proactive, and in a nutshell, in a supportive way, support the organization in handling macroeconomic and geopolitical risks. This is a matter of fact. I truly believe that we are well used to have our protocols, policies, and procedures. That is an area that we may consider out of our comfort zone. What was saying Arlene, I fully agree with her in the sense that the real answer in terms of handling macroeconomic and geopolitical risks is working together in a more integrated way. All the assurance provided, starting from internal audit, of course, but not just internal audit. Let's talk about risk management. Let's talk about compliance, legal, finance, and last but not least, the business have to sit down together, discuss, run also if needed a specific business impact analysis to proactively and not just reactively react to what we may see or experience in our day-to-day life. What we have seen, actually, it is another interesting key risk factor, then most of the risks are actually interconnected and are rapidly changing. So we're not handling one by one, but they are interconnected. How we shall address them all, how we shall propose to our organization an addressable solution that may work in an effective and efficient way, as far as I am concerned, this is the real challenge that we are facing internally. But first of all, I would invite all of us to exchange more information, to exchange information with our corporate functions, information with our business function. And now we have in our hands thousands of data, information. We are a data-driven, in most of the cases, a data-driven company. We shall have a good use of what we have in our hands to possibly predict or to manage very, very rapidly when a macroeconomic or a geopolitical risk may come up, and inviting the company to find out a reasonable, a practical, effective, and efficient way to get them solved. So the integration, the discussion, the sharing of the information without working in a silos, in a silos way that we have unfortunately experienced in the past, this is a real opportunity that we have on our table today. Actually, I'm already answering part of the second question, but I would like to hand over to Arlene to go on what is your role and that you play in your organization.
No,
thank you, Paul.
Yeah, sure. We can also have this second questions answered by Arlene if she wants to add something.
Yeah, so I think other than what's already been said, I think internal audit has a fantastic opportunity to really, I think about it in terms of, are you involved in the right conversations? Do you bring insight to those conversations? So you're not just sitting and listening, that you're actually contributing and challenging. Does it have an impact? So can you evidence that where your contribution is at least making people think, or that you're providing some form of best practice suggestions into the organization? But really, you have to be in the conversation to be able to play a good role in shaping how organizations might tackle this risk.
Very interesting. I like very much your approach, being in the conversations, meaning a lot about where the conversations are held, let's say. But let me say that now we can dive into the second poll, because now we can ask to our audience if their function currently play a role with regards to this kind of risks. We see it, and I would be very impressed if we have a yes answer. Okay, I think that we have a clear answer. For sure, it is not zero. We have some experience, let's say, that is important. I would imagine, probably would have imagined that the no role would even greater, but it's a clear answer, let's say. So I think that the poll is quite stabilized and it's clear, the answer. And it brings us to the next questions. that is about what was answered to the survey, because if the chief audit officer ranked very high this risk, the internal audit effort in this year's survey was very low. So my question to Alessandro, and then I will turn the questions to Arlene, is how can we comment this result? How much time then and how you spend on the macroeconomic and geopolitical uncertainty risk now?
Thank you, Paolo. Unfortunately, I expected more or less the answers that we have seen in the fall. As I told you, it is something new. Still, in most of the organizations, as far as I'm aware, we didn't develop robust and solid policies and procedures for the rest of macroeconomic and geopolitical risks. So we are somehow disoriented. Is it actually falling within our responsibility? Yes or no? How we shall address, how we shall discuss, with whom? I would say that unfortunately, this is where we are today. We have to change. We have to change in the sense that I truly believe that, first of all, we, in consideration also of the advisory role that we play within our organization, we have to be seated at the right places, which is not just the board of directors. It means that we have to participate to discussions and tables among business leaders when discussing, for instance, strategic planning, where the company would like to move over the next 3 and 5 years. Is it actually considering the macroeconomic and the geopolitical risks that we are facing in Europe, as where most of our companies are multinationals? So even if I'm based, for instance, here in Milan, we need to address risks related to export sanctions, as a matter of example, due to, unfortunately, following the invasion of Russia in Ukraine. Other threats, as mentioned before, might be in other parts of the world, Taiwan, as a matter of example. Of course, for each of our companies, we should have a better understanding of the top risks that we face, also in terms of exposure to macroeconomic and geopolitical risks, and thereafter to run with the appropriate also external support, analysis, in-depth review with the key internal functions, and if needed, also external expert. I would say that this is a combination. I would say that this is the right approach. We can thereafter do any additional exercise, which might be related, for instance, to the level of, let me say, effectiveness analysis that we can do and run in relation to our organization mechanism to identify and assess and monitor the changes. We have to have and help the company to develop an agile strategy, an agile internal control system to face, to adapt our internal organization to this very rapid and, in most of the cases, unfortunately, unpredictable trends that may have an impact on our organization. So this is actually what I see as an area of improvement, at least within my organization. And as said before, we need to work more and more with other external, with other corporate functions primarily, but last and not least with the business itself. So never forget that we are not just running a philosophical exercise in the interest of the board of directors. As a matter of example, we all are actually selected, hired by the board of directors. We are autonomous, independent, yes, of course, but this privileged position has to be used in the best interest of the organization as a whole, in consideration of the risks that we are facing, and also to provide them a practical solution that can be translated into practice in the interest of what we may call a business continuity of our organization in certain regions, but it can have an impact also on our organization as a whole. So this is actually what I think about that specific point.
Thank you, Alessandro. Very, very interesting. I would ask the same question to Arlene. Also, pointing out the specificity of each kind of business. Let's say that if we speak about a financial conglomerate or a small business, there are a lot of differences, but I'm sure that the thing that we are saying here are probably widely applicable. What do you think, and what is your position on that?
So I recognise the results of the poll, but I do think that perhaps we've undersold our collective efforts ever so slightly. I think if you're doing any kind of audit of financial crime, operational resilience, cybersecurity, scenario planning, disaster recovery planning, business continuity, then you are facing into aspects of macroeconomic and geopolitical risk. This headline is new, but some of the facets that sit beneath it are not new. And I think this headline used to be reserved for newspaper headings or TV news flashes. We don't speak about macroeconomic and geopolitical uncertainty in the realms of audit. So, for example, if I had a macroeconomic and geopolitical uncertainty audit on my plan, I would have no space for anything else. So we chunk it up into different things that are more auditable. But I do think that organisations and internal auditors need to spend some time to understand what this phrase means for your organisation. So to the very point that you made, Paolo, that if you work in financial services or in the utilities sector or the charity sector, it will mean very different things to different organisations, but you have to spend time to understand what that means. So how could it manifest in my organisation? What would it do to our delivery of strategy? How could it impact our audit plan? Where are our blind spots? So what aren't we thinking about? Do we have bias because we're all internal auditors in the same sector? Let's reach out to other sectors who might be able to unblock some of our biases, and really spend time to understand how that might open up the conversation that you have with your board. Ask your board or your audit committee, where are your blind spots when it comes to talking about macroeconomic and geopolitical risk? It's that famous Donald Rumsfeld phrase, we have the known knowns, the known unknowns, and the unknown unknowns. So how do we start to talk about it in that? And it will take time. Look, this isn't easy, but it's what makes internal audit and risk management such a wonderful career, because we get to roll our sleeves up and be curious and share ideas and challenge each other. I think that this is what makes it so great. So I don't think we're not covering facets of this in our collective audit plans. I just don't think that we're spending enough time to really understand how all the pieces of the jigsaw fit together.
Yeah, very interesting. I agree personally. The fact that we spend a lot of time on many of the facets that you cited is true. What we need probably is to wrap them together into something that is readable in front of threats, of scenarios that we can figure out and treat and manage, let's say. We can go to the third poll. I would say that this is a very specific poll that is about crisis management. Is there a crisis management setup in place in case of a high exposure to specific potential geopolitical risk? But I would say in general, is there a crisis management setup? Yes, no, do not know. Let's see the answer. So, as Arlene was saying, we probably undersold the work that we do on these subjects in the Risk in Focus survey. I mean, because there are these crisis management are widely adopted. For sure. What do you think, Lynn?
Yeah, this is an interesting result. So I'm pleased that we do have as many organisations as the poll suggests facing into crisis management. It's a wonderful. This is where internal auditors can have fun. It's doing the crisis simulations. It's challenging plans. If you're as interested in disaster movies as I am, it allows you to think about, you know, the most obscure disasters and then work back from that. So I think it's good that we are facing into crisis management. My advice and to go on to your question, Paolo, if I may, I am very fortunate within Royal London that I have access to the board, to senior management, to the simulation exercises that they do, because they value internal audits viewpoint and our ability as auditors to take a step back and just watch how things are playing out in the room, and also to give them gentle nudges, or, you know, yeah, you haven't actually talked about your crisis plan yet. Should you not pull that off the shelf and actively use it? So things like that, you know, that's where we really add value. But in terms of how we can support the board, again, it's about being in the room, being confident in your voice, so you have a lot of value to add to the conversation. So challenge, ask why, constantly ask why are we doing that? Why are we not considering this? You know, my colleague Arlene in Royal London, they're doing this. Why are we not thinking about that? Connect with as many people as you can on LinkedIn and ask them for help. There's no weakness in doing so, and then bring that into your board conversations. I think Alessandro talked about being agile. So be ready to flex and move and challenge your own thinking. I'm never always right, and I'm always the first to admit when someone knows more than me. So that's great. But be curious to gather as much insight. Read your internal audit magazines. Read Risk and Focus. Any other thought leadership. Use Google. Use ChatGPT. Although perhaps check your organisation's rules around that first. But you know, I'm not condoning you to use it for company sensitive information, but it is a fascinating tool, and AI will soon become something that we're all using in anger. And think about how you can encourage your organisation to make more use of all the tools it has in place. So if you're having a risk management conversation and nobody is pulling out your risk register or your risk appetite statement or your crisis management plan or a playbook, then say, well, why did we spend all that time building it if we're not going to use it actively to manage the risk? It's not a document that sits on the shelf looking pretty, gathering dust. It's something that should be constantly, like a well-loved book. It should be constantly used. There should be coffee spills all over it. The pages should be bent. You know, these things are supposed to be there to help drive the conversation.
Thank you.
You can tell I'm very passionate about this, Paolo.
No, I think you said something that linked with what Alessandro said about the fact that we have no policies, we have no guidance on how to go on in the organization to support the board, not in a formal way, let's say. What do you think, Alessandro?
I truly believe you're right, Paolo, in the sense that in order to answer to the question, we have to consider first, we need to have an understanding of the business from one side, but also a holistic approach. We are in a key position within our organizations in the sense that we have a 360 view of our system of internal controls and risk management. Actually, a very privileged view of our organization. Starting from that, we need to help our organization to get a better understanding of, first, the interconnections among risks. We shouldn't work, as we said before, in a separate way, silos. Let's try to get and see what is how they are linked. Numbers of risks, what are the interconnections, what are the consequences that have to be considered as a whole, not in a separate way. We have internal resources to be used. Risk management, we said before, compliance, security, a number of other resources, financial. So there are risk indicators that can be used by us, analyzed, in order to get a better understanding of what the trend is and how we may expect the trend to move over the next couple of years, 3 years. So the monitoring of the key risks in an interconnected way is definitely what I truly believe key for all of us. In order to provide, as I mentioned before, an assurance to the board that we have appropriate internal controls. Otherwise, we need to immediately raise our hands up, say, guys, we have a problem. We have to tackle and address in a more appropriate way the issues that we are facing, where we don't see the appropriate system of internal controls in place. And secondly, and more importantly, as I said before, this is not just a philosophical discussion. We need to come back to the board, come back to our management committee with practical things, solutions. Okay, we have said many things. We have discussed about macroeconomic, geopolitical. We may have different opinions. Okay, fine. What is the impact for us on our business? Our business, and primarily, I would say that it happened to me in other tables, for our people. People comes first. We need to protect our people first. Unfortunately, as we have experienced in Ukraine, as a matter of an example. So let's start and consider what is the priority for the company. People comes first. Okay, let's focus on it. How to protect the safety of our people, as it happened during the pandemic outbreak, as a matter of another example. So let's start with the consideration of the key priorities for the company, for ourselves, and thereafter translate them into strategy. Something very tangible. I belong to an organization where they are all engineers, including myself, which is a lawyer, actually. So they appreciate if at the end of our analysis, risk analysis, we try to recommend them something in practice. What shall we do to protect ourselves? What shall we do to protect our business interest and the interest of our shareholders? We are a public company. We don't have a majority shareholder within our organization. So we are very, very careful also in taking into considerations internal and external stakeholders. And we need to find out the right balance among the interests that are actually involved and might have been impacted by, as a matter of example, that we have said, the macroeconomic and geopolitical risks. This is what I would recommend to myself primarily, but also to the audience today.
Thank you, Alessandro. Very clear and helpful, I think. Also to push our audience to be challenging, as Lynn said, to inspire them to be curious, to go and see what, with their knowledge, can threat the organization, given that a sort of scenario is in their mind, I would say. So we also need, as internal auditors, be aware of what is going on in the world, let's say, and also probably have some formalization about the risk appetite frameworks, what happens in certain scenario, and promoting ourselves and our role in that way. Another questions, just to end a little bit our panel, I would say, I would very curious to know, I think everybody wants to know and be inspired by you, if you can tell us what are the 3 most important activities that for you internal audit must perform in this area. If you were some of our audience, what would you do if you have to start your activity in the area? Arlene, please, or yes, yes, Arlene.
Okay, so some practical approaches, perhaps. If I was starting to do an audit in this area, I would start with either a collaboration tool if you're tech enabled, or a big sheet of blank paper, and then I would get some colleagues from second line, from the business and from your own internal audit team, and just start mapping out all the different areas of your business that this risk could touch on and where it might be assured, and then do that. Well, what needs to go right? What could go wrong? And just start to be creative. That's my favorite part of an audit, is where you've got that blank sheet of paper in front of you and you're trying to build something. Then I would, like Alessandro said, look to see what data you could use to help pinpoint which parts of that map you might want to focus on. And then, you know, an example of an audit that you could do is you could create your own fictitious scenario. For example, a major supply chain failure because of maybe a war. And then say, okay, if I was the risk manager, what things would I look to get? So I would look to see what my risk strategy is, my playbook, my risk register, and I would just start to walk through that scenario and say, what are the different controls that I would look to see evidencing, and see if you can evidence them. So rather than it be again a siloed, it's a cross-cutting organizational theoretical audit that you are basically building. Or you start with the worst possible scenario, that your company suffers a liquidity issue, or has to close its doors, employees are at threat, and work back from that and say, okay, what would have stopped this from happening? So there's a couple of examples.
Okay, thank you, Arlene. Alessandro, please.
Yes, as far as I am concerned, as I mentioned to you before, let's run a so-called integrated risk analysis that may help us to come to conclusions or to outcome of that analysis that can be reported to our key internal stakeholders, starting from the committee and the board of directors, with a very clear message of the risks at stake and the countermeasures that the company may implement. Of course, as internal auditors, we are also required to test key controls, programs, countermeasures, as we have mentioned before. Though this is another critical part in consideration of the fact that as far as the macroeconomic and geopolitical uncertainty and risks, we don't have developed, at least within my organization, a very solid and robust process and procedure to address them all. But specific audit testing on key controls and programs can be definitely done and provide the level of assurance that the board of directors, the audit committee, and the top management may require. Last but not least, training, upskilling of our soft skills, of our hard and soft skills. So this is something which is actually outside from what we may consider our comfort zone. So let's get, we need to be contaminated. We need to improve our knowledge from one side and to develop, if needed, new and most advanced state-of-the-art methodological approach to address these key risks. This is what I would recommend, and actually I'm working on it within my organization.
Thank you, Alessandro. I think both of you have been very inspiring for me, for sure. I hope also for our audience. And I would let this 5 minutes to see whether there's some questions. There is a question for you, Alessandro. You spoke about external data. Can you please elaborate?
Yes, with pleasure. For instance, at country level, you might have risk indicators coming from publicly available sources that can be used to elaborate an analysis. Very simple things related to what have been developed over the past years following the so-called corruption perception index, as a matter of example. This is something that has been used to somehow classify, qualify a country in a way or in another. Let's try to use the same approach using different risk factors to be considered to elaborate a sort of a dashboard for each and every country that we may consider at risk for our business.
Alina, may I ask you to answer to the second question, how to avoid risk management being an exercise at one point of time and instead integrate this to everyday business management?
Yeah, now there's probably not enough time for me to. Yeah, I could talk about this forever, but some very quick responses. Be very mindful of the strategy conversation happening here, and then your risk conversation happening here. So within Royal London and confidentially amongst these virtual walls, we have an executive committee and an executive risk committee, and I'm saying doesn't make sense because you talk about strategy here. The risk conversation has to be seamlessly woven through that. So from an internal audit perspective, you can constantly challenge, where are you talking about risk? And by risk, I mean, are we taking enough risk as well as are we taking too much risk? And just constantly challenge about when do we talk about risk appetite? When do we talk about controls? And making sure that that's baked into the conversation. But this is a culture point. People do talk about risk management, hopefully every day. They just don't know that they're talking about it. They don't call it risk management. They call it their processes. They call it their BAU, but it is actually managing risk. So I think the more that we draw to people's life that risk management is part of our day job, it's inherent in everything that we do. And when they think about risk management, they think about the end of the month self-assessment or the risk register that's sitting on the shelf. If you can encourage them to use that as part of their daily tools, then it naturally, hopefully, will become much less of a now's the part where we talk about risk management, because that for me is a big bugbear.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that we can go to the conclusions and summarize our key messages. I would say that the polarization, geopolitical polarization, is growing, as we all can see, as well as the risk of outright conflicts, posing new challenges to the life of our companies. Internal audit must be aware of this change, first thing. Internal audit can help companies' governance effectiveness, strengthening its advisory role both on strategy and internal controls. To this end, internal audit should understand the company's exposure to geopolitical risks, assess the organization's level of preparedness on these cross-cutting issues, facilitate coordination between internal functions. As we have said, we have a privileged position inside the organization. We must use it, even in this case, and actively collaborate in setting up an effective governance framework for assessing and management the source of multiple risks. I always make a reference to seismic tectonic plates, as they say, when you have geopolitical events, it's like a big earthquake somewhere, and you have your house robust, and you have your house ready to absorb the challenges and the earthquake, let's say. That is what we are requested to do, I think, to help the organization to cope with this multiple risk threats, let's say. Okay, Pascal, I would invite you to conclude.
Thank you, Paolo. Thank you to the panelists. I think it was a very interesting discussion, and I think it would be very interesting to make a new status in 1 year time, maybe, to see how it evolves. That would be great. So I will conclude with the classical logistical detail and ask you to fill in the CPE form in Slido in case you need a CPE certificate. And I would like to thank you very, very much for the very interesting discussion and wish you a very nice rest of the day. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much to everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye. Enjoy
Goodbye.
the rest of
Bye.
the day. Bye-bye.